They say the cruelest betrayal isn't the knife in your back, it's the moment you realize no one even thinks you were worth stabbing. Just silence, just absence, just a seat that was never reserved. They called my name over the loudspeaker like I was a lost child, gate 27. I remember the number because the man with the microphone said it twice, slowly, as if I didn't know how to find my way in an airport. I was sitting near the vending machines holding a boarding pass that didn't scan. Not because it was wrong, because it didn't exist. My son forgot to buy me a ticket. He booked the whole family first class to Vancouver, his wife, their 2 girls, even the au pair, but not me. I stood there in my clean navy trousers and my soft gray cardigan, while the agent blinked at the screen and said calmly, "There is no reservation under your name." I called Marcus, but the phone rang through 5 times, then voicemail. So I sat down and waited. I figured it was just a mistake. Maybe they added me late, maybe my name was under something else, but no one came back. 38 minutes passed. Then I saw the plane taxi away through the window, smooth, confident, like it had taken off 1,000 times, with a full cabin and no guilt. I stayed on that bench, another hour, just in case, but deep down I already knew you can't forget someone like that, unless you've already decided they don't matter. I watched a little girl cry when her balloon popped. Her father knelt down, offered her his soda straw to play with, and she laughed again in under a minute. The sound of her laughter pierced something in me, sharp, small, familiar. That kind of comfort, that instant safety, used to flow from me so effortlessly. I remembered tying Marcus's shoelaces while he sulked about kindergarten, how he'd cling to my leg at drop-off. I remembered being the answer to his every ache. But somewhere along the way, my presence became optional. That kind of care used to be mine a long time ago, when Marcus was small and thought I was the center of the world. Funny how quick you can go from center to margin. When I finally stood up, my knees popped. I walked back toward the escalators, past the travelers, the shops, the neon signs, selling memories to people who still had time to make some. Outside, the sun had gone soft behind the glass. I climbed into the shuttle and said nothing. Not to the driver, not to the woman next to me who smelled like oranges. I held my silence, the way you hold a glass bird, tight, careful, pretending it isn't already cracked. Let me ask you something. Has anyone ever left you behind and made it look like an accident? Because that's what hurts the most when being forgotten isn't a mistake. It's a message, and I heard mine loud and clear. I didn't call Marcus that night. I didn't want to hear his voice smooth things over like nothing had happened. I wasn't ready for excuses dressed up as misunderstandings, so I just made tea, fed the cat, and folded the laundry that had been sitting in the dryer for 2 days. The house felt colder than usual, not in temperature, in tone. It had been mine for 37 years, yet that evening it felt like a waiting room I didn't belong in. The next morning, a yellow envelope slid through the front door slot. No return address. Just my name printed in block letters. Inside, a gift card, $50, grocery store logo. No note, no apology, no signature. Just a silent gesture tossed at the wound. Like a cotton ball on a gunshot, I placed it on the kitchen counter and left it there. At noon, the phone rang. Caller ID lit up with his name. I let it ring. I listened to his voice pour through the machine. He said they had boarded quickly. He thought someone else had taken care of my ticket. He didn't realize until they were already in the air. Said he was sorry. But things got confusing with the group booking. I made lunch. I ate in silence. Later that week, I got a package. Inside was a t-shirt that said Aloha in faded red letters and a keychain shaped like a pineapple. It smelled like sunscreen and effort, not love, not the kind that remembers your seat number. And I sat there, holding that shirt, wondering how many people it passed through before reaching me. Did he pick it out himself? Did he rush it at the last minute, grabbing it at the airport shop like an obligation? The worst part was I kept trying to believe him. I went out to tend the garden. The hydrangeas had browned too early this year. Maybe the soil was tired. Maybe I was. The weeds were winning along the edges, but I pulled at them anyway, even though my fingers ached and the gloves were thinning. There was a time I would have laughed this off, given him the benefit of the doubt. Marcus had always been the kind who forgot dates but remembered contracts, a man more familiar with deadlines than birthdays. I'd accepted that about him. But something about this felt different, not rushed, not careless, calculated like I was a number trimmed from the budget. That Sunday he posted a photo, the whole family smiling under palm trees, matching shirts, no empty space in the frame. I stared at the image longer than I should have, trying to spot something, anything, a trace of absence. But there was none, just a perfect curated image of joy and not one thought spared for the woman who raised the man holding the camera. I remember blinking slowly, like if I stared long enough, maybe I'd materialize in the background, a blurry figure holding a child or adjusting sunglasses. But I wasn't there. Not even in spirit. The bright sunlight in the photo only made my own shadow feel longer. That was the moment. I stopped defending him in my own head. 2 weeks after the trip, the mail brought something that wasn't a postcard or keychain. It was a formal envelope from the foundation Marcus and I had co-founded 14 years ago. We had set it up after Nathan passed. It was our way of keeping his legacy alive, supporting small education grants for underfunded school districts across the state. Inside was a single sheet, crisp and impersonal. It informed me that the annual board meeting had taken place last Thursday. New strategic direction, revised bylaws, a vote on leadership roles. The kind of letter you send after decisions have already been made. I stared at it for a while, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. My name wasn't listed anywhere, not as a founder, not as a voting member, not even as a recipient of gratitude. I opened the foundation website. The Our Team section had been redesigned, sleeker, polished, a new mission statement. Photos of Marcus and a few young professionals. One of them looked like a marketing intern. I scrolled. Nathan's name remained, barely tucked at the bottom under in memory. Mine was gone entirely. The board had always met at our home in the early years. We built it in my dining room. I poured coffee while Nathan drafted the mission on yellow legal pads. Marcus didn't show much interest back then, too busy building his consulting firm. But when the money started to grow, so did his attention. I clicked on the public filings. My access to internal documents had been revoked. I had been removed from the founding charter. No phone call, no explanation, just silence. I sat in the study and let the realization settle like dust in an old room. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. And that doesn't happen by accident. It had taken strategy meetings, signatures, legal advice. Marcus had planned this, smiled through it, probably told himself it was for efficiency, simpler operations, a younger face for donors. That evening I looked around the house. Every framed photo, every file folder, every certificate still bore my handwriting. Yet legally, on paper, I had vanished. It was as if someone had swept away the chalk lines of my history, hoping no one would notice the outline, and for a while, maybe I didn't. Maybe I let them. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the care he took to hide it behind polite updates and mailed notices. That night, I didn't sleep. I got up at 3 a.m. and opened the cedar chest in the back of the hall closet. Inside, I kept all our original records, scanned copies, signatures, Nathan's will, the original foundation registration papers, my name on every line that mattered. I laid them out on the table. Marcus may have rewritten the public version, but I had the first draft, the real one, and something told me that version might still count. The following Monday, I took the morning slow. No coffee, just a cup of warm water with lemon. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt paused, like something important had been left unfinished. I laid the original foundation documents across the kitchen table. The sun hit the table edge, warm on the paper, and for a moment it reminded me of Nathan. He always said light reveals everything, if you let it. I made a copy of every sheet. I filed one set into a new folder labeled in thick marker. The other went into a locked drawer in my bedroom desk, along with the old power of attorney Nathan had signed back in 2010. I had nearly forgotten it existed. By lunchtime, I had spoken with Gloria. She was Nathan's old colleague, retired now, but still sharp. She was the one who first helped us file the nonprofit paperwork over a decade ago. She had a way of speaking that made people listen without ever raising her voice. I asked her if she could look over a few things. She agreed without asking many questions. That was the kind of trust we had built through years of showing up for each other. By Wednesday, she confirmed it. The original foundation documents hadn't been lawfully amended. Marcus had filed a new charter, but the transfer of authority was incomplete. I still had standing as a founder, which meant everything Marcus had done since pushing me out was on thin ice. I walked through the hallway and stopped in front of the gallery wall. All the photos were there: my wedding, Marcus's high school graduation, Nathan's retirement dinner. And then I noticed something. Marcus's wedding photo had been removed. The empty nail was still there. I hadn't taken it down. I hadn't even realized it was gone. That meant someone had come into the house while I was out, or Marcus had asked someone to collect it. Quietly, that chilled me more than the airport. I went into the guest bedroom. The small closet I kept locked was open. Nothing was missing, but the dust had shifted. Someone had been looking for something. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to, staring at the faint marks left on the floor, as if they might speak up and tell me who had been here and why. My heart wasn't racing. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a boundary is crossed. I changed the locks that afternoon. When I sat down that night, I wrote everything out by hand, a full timeline from the day of the flight to the moment I opened the rickety cedar chest. I included names, dates, file numbers. Then I placed it in an envelope and gave it to Gloria for safekeeping. That was the first time in weeks I slept through the night. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like precision. Quiet truth put in the right hands. He had tried to remove me without notice, but I had never depended on being noticed to be powerful. And now I had the kind of proof that didn't need noise to matter. The invitation came printed on heavy cream cardstock, elegant font, embossed seal. The kind of paper meant to suggest importance. Marcus had invited me to the Foundation's 15th anniversary gala, a formality most likely, a gesture to keep up appearances. It arrived 2 days after I secured my original documents and left the timeline with Gloria. I didn't plan to go at first, but then I thought about that guest bedroom closet, about the missing photo, about the silence wrapped in careful civility, and something inside me shifted. I wanted to be seen. Not in anger, not in pride, but as a quiet reminder that some names can't be erased, no matter how neatly others try. I wore a dark blue dress, the same one I wore to Nathan's last award ceremony. It wasn't loud, but it fit with dignity. I arrived at the event center just before the doors opened. Most guests floated in pairs or small groups. I walked in alone, holding nothing but the weight of my own name. The place was full of chandeliers and curated smiles. Waiters moved like clockwork. I scanned the room. Marcus was near the stage, laughing with a man in a pale suit and a woman with too much perfume. He didn't see me. Not yet. My seat was near the back, table 14, near the restroom corridor, and a portable wall divider. Not on the seating chart, just a handwritten addition, like an afterthought. I sat anyway. I wanted to watch. The slideshow began halfway through dinner. Images from the early years. Volunteers, school visits, Marcus shaking hands, a brief flash of Nathan holding a certificate, and then one frame, just one, of me, standing beside a group of students with painted posters. It flickered so quickly that if you blinked, you would have missed it. But I saw it. That 1 second felt both like a nod and a dismissal, like the photo had been let in only because someone forgot to delete it. It faded quickly, as if the photo knew it was only permitted a moment. The speaker read the new mission aloud, shorter, more businesslike, no mention of founding members. Marcus took the mic to close the program. He thanked donors, he thanked his team. Then he stepped away without a glance toward the back of the room. I stood and left quietly, unnoticed. But in my bag sat the original charter, the legal documentation bearing my signature beside Nathan's. And at home, Gloria had already delivered the papers to her legal contact who specialized in nonprofit law. The wheels had started turning days ago. I didn't need a microphone to reclaim my place. I didn't need applause. That night I drove home with the windows cracked open, letting the evening air settle across my skin. I had been written out of the program, but that only matters if you believe the stage is the only place where power lives, and I never believed that. I had never needed the front of the room, only the truth, and that was already moving forward without sound. 2 mornings after the gala, a light knock came at my door just past 9. I opened it to find Gloria standing there with a man. I didn't recognize him. He looked no older than 40, sharply dressed, carrying a leather case with worn corners. She introduced him as Anthony Bell, a nonprofit specialist who had worked with estate transitions and founder disputes for 2 decades. His voice was calm, low, and steady. He didn't waste time. We sat at the kitchen table surrounded by sunlight and old paper. Anthony began to explain the legal process quietly, respectfully, but with precision. Because of the gaps in the revised filings Marcus had submitted and the lack of formal authorization to amend the foundation's leadership, I still held legal co-founder status, which meant Marcus had overstepped. His decisions, funding allocations, and restructuring efforts could all be challenged. If I chose to file a formal complaint, I didn't react with anger. I asked about options. Anthony laid out a clean path, one that wouldn't require court hearings or newspaper headlines, a private motion to restore full recognition of my role. Alongside that, a transition clause. I could step down later on my terms, naming an independent successor if I wished. Marcus would not have control over it again unless formally approved by both parties. I asked how long it would take. He said 3 weeks, maybe 4. The foundation's board would be notified. The legal filings would trigger a re-review of its current governance structure, and the state records would reflect the correction. He passed me the first 2 forms to sign. I read every word, each sentence a restoration of who I had always been, even when others tried to erase it. My hands didn't shake, but later when the house quieted again, I sat alone in the kitchen and for a moment I hesitated, not out of doubt in the documents, but in myself. Maybe I had let too many things slip, let Marcus lead too easily, stayed quiet too long. Maybe I had made myself invisible. That thought stung more than any signature forged behind my back. After they left, I didn't sit back down. I went into the attic, something I hadn't done in years. I found the old wooden box Nathan had carved in his last summer. Inside were letters, faded, handwritten, notes from the early days of the foundation. We used to write one another letters to place in that box each year on the anniversary of its founding, not to read, just to remember. One of them from our 5th year was addressed to me in his handwriting. I read it for the first time. He wrote that the foundation would only mean something if it held its heart. And he said if anyone ever tried to pull me out of it, I had his blessing to fight for it with both hands, open and full of grace. That afternoon I lit a candle beside that box and sat quietly with the letter beside me. It wasn't just about legality. Now it was about meaning, memory, Nathan's values, and the truth that didn't need to be shouted to be felt. There was a stillness in that moment. A sacred hush that wrapped itself around me like a vow, quiet but unbreakable. My signature wasn't a fight, it was a return, a restoration of what had been carefully built. What was mine, not because of power, but because of presence. And that kind of presence doesn't fade just because someone edits a document. By the 2nd week, the board had received notice. Anthony sent me a brief update confirming the filings had been acknowledged, and the state record of the foundation's formation had been amended to reflect original founder intent. My name was back where it had always belonged. It was a quiet correction. No press, no calls, just a shift in the record that would travel further than any speech. Marcus hadn't called, but I knew he knew. The following Sunday, the foundation hosted a community luncheon in the city park, meant to showcase its new education initiative, the one Marcus had launched last year without consulting anyone but donors. I wasn't invited, of course, not officially, but a flyer had been left in my mailbox, probably by one of the volunteers who didn't know the full story. I went. I wore the same shoes I wore on the foundation's first field trip. When we visited that rural elementary school in Mason County, they were worn at the edges, but still sturdy, still mine. The park was filled with white tents and polite clapping. Children painted their names on banners. Tables were stacked with branded water bottles and reusable tote bags. The stage was modest but set at the center, raised slightly. The banner above read, "Innovation through Generations." I stayed near the back. Marcus stood tall behind the podium. He smiled often, spoke about the future, mentioned collaboration, used phrases like long-term vision and sustainable impact. His tone was smooth, his delivery practiced, but there was one moment when his eyes drifted toward the crowd, and I saw the pause just a second. He saw me, and he kept talking as if I were no different from the trees or the wind. No nod, no blink, no shift in rhythm. Only that one subtle lock of the eyes that told me he had noticed that he was hoping I would walk away. I didn't. I stood until the end, until the applause, until the volunteers began stacking chairs and the kids gathered around tables for snacks. Then I walked past the tables and left a printed envelope with the woman at the info booth. She smiled and placed it in a bin marked reports. Inside that envelope was a single copy of the state document highlighted under my name. I didn't look back that evening. I didn't mention the event to anyone I didn't need to, because when someone tries to build a legacy by trimming off their own roots, eventually the ground reminds them who watered it. First, and sometimes the most powerful speech is made by simply standing in a place. No one expected you to still own quietly without apology, with every step rooted in memory they thought had been erased by the end of that week. The storm was still silent, but gathering force, Nathan called and confirmed what I already suspected deep down. Marcus hadn't just forged my signature. He had rerouted 2 of my retirement accounts into a holding company, bearing a similar name to the nonprofit, all under the guise of reinvestment and tax efficiency. There were no flags on the accounts, no alerts, just quiet, withdrawals masked as internal transfers. It had started small, a few thousand, then 50, then almost 85,000. It was all calculated, all clean, just hidden in plain sight. Nathan requested a forensic accountant. We signed the release. 2 days later, we had the timeline. Marcus had started the transfers the same week. I'd had a mild fever and stayed home from church. He'd called that day, offered to help manage some overdue bills. I remembered handing him the folders. I had even thanked him. He didn't steal with force. He just removed the weight of decision until nothing was left in my hands. Nathan's voice was calm, clinical. He walked me through the reversal plan. We could freeze the holdings under suspicion of financial misconduct. The forged signature gave us ground for civil action. But he warned me this wasn't just about getting the money back. This would be public. Marcus's donors, his board, his image. I paused, not out of fear, but from the weight of it all. How much had I missed while believing I was being cared for? How many times had I called his kindness love when it was really permission? That night, I lit a single lamp in the kitchen. I opened my old recipe book, not to cook, just to feel something that hadn't changed. The handwriting in the margins was mine. The stains from peach cobbler and summer from turkey gravy and fall from years. When we had shared more than silence the next morning, I signed the authorization. Nathan filed the freeze and notified the financial institutions. I made no calls to Marcus. I didn't answer the one he placed that afternoon. Instead, I went to the garden, trimmed the rosemary, picked some tomatoes. I wasn't playing pretend, I was claiming what was still mine. By Friday, Nathan called again. One of the banks had already flagged the account and moved to compliance review. We were ahead and it would hold. I didn't celebrate. I just stood in the kitchen and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Maybe to the quiet, maybe to that voice in me that had finally said enough. The paper trail was mine again, and every page that had once been signed behind my back would now be rewritten one clause at a time. It was raining that morning. Not the kind that rushed and screamed against the windows, but the soft kind that lingered and soaked everything slowly. I took that as a sign. Some endings didn't need thunder, just clarity. Nathan called to say the injunction had been signed. The court had granted a freeze on all suspicious accounts tied to my trust. Marcus would be notified by certified mail, but he'd already know something was coming. His access had been cut off the night before. Not $1 more would move without a full audit. That same afternoon, I received an invitation in the mail. Ivory cardstock embossed. It was for the nonprofit's annual fundraising dinner set at the downtown Marriott. Marcus was listed as host and keynote speaker. There was a note scribbled at the bottom. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was his. It read, "Hope to see you there." I didn't RSVP. I showed up. I wore navy, not black. I brought no one. Walked in alone. A few familiar faces nodded politely, others avoided my eyes. The room was full of polished confidence, laughter at half-empty wine glasses, music that never settled. I spotted Ruth near the back. Her face tensed when she saw me, then softened. She made her way over and touched my hand. No words, just presence. That was enough. They seated me at table 12, far from the stage, near the caterer's prep exit. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to be seen. When Marcus took the stage, he looked calm, sharp navy suit, crisp white shirt. He smiled like nothing had changed. He thanked donors, quoted numbers, shared success stories. Then he paused, just before closing. He announced a new initiative, a scholarship fund in honor of my late husband Nathan. He praised his father's values, spoke of legacy and vision. He didn't mention me once, not even as a footnote in the legacy he claimed to honor. When the applause faded, I stood, walked slowly to the side hallway. Ruth followed. We entered a small room off to the side that I had reserved 2 weeks prior. It was empty, except for a table, a chair, and a flat screen. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the injunction, the bank audit summary, and a revised board statement I had requested to be drafted. Ruth would deliver them tomorrow to the board's counsel. I sat in the chair, not tired, just steady. The air was still. On the screen, a live feed of the ballroom played without sound. Marcus shook hands, posed for photos, lifted a glass. He had the room, but I had the truth. I whispered to Ruth to leave the lights off when she closed the door. I wanted that moment with myself. No noise, just the quiet knowing that something had shifted. Not just in the room, in me. Marcus had taken the stage, but I had taken back the story. 2 days after the gala, Marcus showed up at my door. He didn't knock. He rang the bell twice, then again, a third time. I waited until the sound stopped, echoing before I opened it. His tie was loose, the collar creased. He looked like a man who hadn't slept but still tried to look in control. I stepped aside. He entered without a word. In the kitchen, he stood by the counter like he always had, like it still belonged to him. I poured myself tea, none for him. He started with small words, things like misunderstanding, confusion, oversight. He tried to wrap betrayal in business terms like trust was a tax form. I let him speak. Let him explain how the signatures were a mistake, how the financial transfers were part of a temporary reallocation. He used phrases like fiduciary responsibility and administrative delegation. I listened, not because I believed him, but because I wanted to watch the way his voice shifted when he realized I wasn't folding. I placed the court file on the table between us. He didn't touch it, just stared at the embossed seal. That's when the veneer cracked, the charm faded. His words lost polish and became questions layered in blame. He raised his voice slightly, told me I was overreacting, that I didn't understand the structure, that I had never been good with numbers. I didn't answer. I stood, walked to the hall, and returned with a single envelope. Inside was a new set of instructions, a legal addendum drafted by Nathan. It removed Marcus from all positions of financial control. It appointed a third-party fiduciary, backed by 2 compliance officers. It sealed my estate under court supervision. I handed it to him. He didn't open it. His shoulders dropped. His eyes scanned the floor like it could offer him another version of the past. He said one word, "Mom." I didn't respond. I wasn't his mother. In that moment, I was the woman who had paid every bill, signed every check, baked every birthday cake, and I had done it without needing thanks. But I was also the woman who now knew that survival sometimes means locking the door behind you, even if it means locking out someone you once loved. I wasn't going to be the woman who allowed the knife to stay in the drawer once she saw the cut. He left without another word. I stood at the door for a long time after it closed. The wind had picked up. Leaves danced along the sidewalk like they didn't care where they landed. I let the breeze in. That night, I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't question my choice. I didn't mourn the silence he left behind. I opened a new notebook. I wrote the date at the top of the page, and then I wrote one sentence. You can't rewrite a story that was never yours to steal. The following week unfolded like a series of slow, deliberate steps. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet rearrangement of power. I met with the fiduciary twice, a woman named Carla Monroe, mid-50s, sharp eyes, calm voice. She asked direct questions and took careful notes. She didn't smile much, but I trusted her more for that. Carla didn't waste words. She understood that a life, when mishandled, could lose decades in a blink. Together, we rewrote the structure of my estate. Everything was triple-checked. Every beneficiary reviewed, every clause reevaluated. By the end of the meeting, Marcus's name no longer appeared in any position of authority or influence. The inheritance schedule had been locked. The charitable trust had been expanded. The scholarship Marcus had tried to weaponize would now operate under a new board, with Ruth quietly installed as chair. Carla asked if I wanted to notify Marcus. I said no. That evening, I walked through the house slowly, letting my fingers trail along the walls. Every corner held years of effort. The back door Marcus had once fixed, the bookshelf I had stained myself after Nathan died. None of it belonged to the version of him who tried to take what wasn't his. I pulled a small box from my closet. Inside were envelopes I had written long ago but never mailed. Birthday cards, apologies, little notes I had saved for when the time felt right. I burned them one by one in the fireplace, not out of spite, but because the time had passed. There was nothing left to deliver. The phone rang once that night. I didn't answer. I knew the number. It was his. But I had already said everything that needed to be said, without speaking a word. The next morning, Ruth brought over coffee. We sat in the sunroom, windows opened, the morning air sharp with the scent of pine. She didn't ask for updates. She just sat beside me and let the silence be kind. At noon, Carla sent confirmation. The restructuring had been finalized and filed. It was done, legally, permanently. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I took the kettle off the stove and poured us both a fresh cup. The wind outside rustled the trees, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a space I was shrinking inside. It felt like mine again. Not a battlefield, not a courtroom, just a home. I folded the last document, placed it in the lock, and closed the lid. And in that small gesture, the weight shifted. I hadn't won a war. I had taken back my name. The sun hit different that morning. I stood at the front window holding a cup of black coffee in both hands. No rush, no calls, no tension in the air. Just me, my breath, and the slow warmth of light stretching across the wooden floor. Marcus hadn't come by since the documents were finalized. He had tried to call again once, maybe twice. I didn't pick up. There was nothing left to say. The house was still mine. The trust had moved on without him, and so had I. A week later, I drove myself to the airport, not to leave, but to pick up Ruth and her daughter from a short weekend trip. I parked, walked up to the arrivals area, and waited. No one forgot me at the gate. They saw me first. Ruth ran into my arms, her daughter trailing behind, tugging a tiny suitcase. There was no fuss, just connection, just presence. That quiet, honest recognition you don't always get with blood ties. We spent the afternoon at a small diner just outside town. I watched Ruth laugh at her daughter's stories. I stirred my tea. No need to fill every silence. No need to explain my smile. By evening, I returned home alone. But it didn't feel empty. It felt mine. Later that night, I took out the photo of Marcus from the hallway shelf. I didn't throw it away. I didn't curse it. I placed it in a drawer, a closed one. I don't know what he'll do next. But I know what I won't do anymore. I won't shrink to be allowed a seat. I won't beg to be remembered at the gate. I won't write checks to stay loved. The house is in my name. So is the silence. So is the peace. I didn't need a plane to leave. I just needed the strength to stay standing. And now I have it. If this story reminded you of anything in your own life, even just a small moment where you chose yourself over being overlooked, I hope you hold on to that strength. You don't need applause to reclaim your worth. Just quiet certainty. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, know this space sees you. And maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think. Dear friend, sometimes the deepest kind of strength doesn't show up as noise or confrontation. It whispers in quiet resolve. In that silence after the storm, when no one is watching and the crowd has long dispersed, you find your own breath again. That's where true healing begins. We often carry the weight of memories that were never honored, of roles we filled without thanks. But know this, your story doesn't become less valid just because someone else tried to erase it. Your presence, your love, your sacrifices, they count, even if they were met with silence. There comes a moment when the soul says, enough, not out of bitterness, but clarity. That is the Stoic lesson at the heart of this story. Not to control others, but to reclaim the only thing truly ours, our response, our peace, our boundaries. Marcus's silence, his oversight, his betrayal, they could have defined the end, but instead she chose presence over permission, grace over guilt. She didn't fight for attention, she stood for truth. That, dear friend, is a different kind of legacy, the kind built not on applause, but on authenticity. So if you've ever been left behind, overlooked, written out of someone else's narrative, I hope you remember, your worth was never up for vote. Your seat at the table doesn't need to be earned by shrinking. Take the quiet, take the stillness, let it rebuild you. Let it remind you that nothing noble is ever truly lost, especially not you. Your name is yours. Keep writing, with love and light, from one soul reclaiming their place to another. If this story moved you, even a little, please like, share, and subscribe. There's someone out there who needs to feel seen. Let's make sure they do.